Hi guys, welcome to video lecture number 2. In this video I want to explore in a little bit more depth how energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. And I'd also like to talk about symbiotic relationships. We've looked at predator-prey and parasite-host relationships within food webs, but these are not the only types of relationships among organisms. Go ahead and pause the video and write the essential question in your notes. So far we've looked at ecosystems with an emphasis on the direction of energy flow. But what do we know about the total amount of energy within an ecosystem? How is the amount of energy distributed among the different types of organisms we've talked about? In order to answer these questions, we need to classify and define specific energy levels within an ecosystem. We've already been talking about them in class. They're called trophic levels. Each organism on Earth must take in energy from its environment to stay alive. The cells of all living things need constant inputs of energy so they can carry out the metabolic functions necessary to remain alive, grow, and reproduce. Producers provide a source of chemical energy for organisms that eat them. The diagram below shows the overall flow of energy through living things. At each step, or trophic level in a food chain, the transfer of energy involves a loss of energy in the form of heat and body activities. For example, when you exercise, you get hot. The heat you feel in your body results from the energy transformations that happen when you move. When you sweat, your body expends energy to cool itself down. Plants use most of the energy they collect from the sun to grow and repair themselves and to reproduce. Only about 10% of the energy is stored in chemical bonds and available to consumers like herbivores. Herbivores use most of the energy from their food to do some of the same functions, to grow, heal, reproduce. Even chewing grass all day takes quite a bit of energy, not to mention running from predators. Only 10% of the energy eaten by herbivores is stored and available to carnivores or secondary consumers. The same general pattern applies to each trophic level in a food chain and is called the rule of 10%. Hopefully it now means a little bit more to you when I say that producers represent the first trophic level. Herbivores, or primary consumers, represent the second trophic level. Primary consumers feed on producers. Carnivores, or secondary consumers, represent the third trophic level. Secondary consumers feed on primary consumers. Tertiary consumers and quaternary consumers make up the next two levels, and so on. Tertiary means third level, and quaternary means fourth level. Quintenary would be the word for fifth level. There are almost never more than 5 trophic levels in a food chain. On the last slide we talked about how the amount of energy changes as it's transferred from one organism to the next. Recall that some energy is given off to the environment as heat during transfers. Because some energy is given off during heat in and between energy transfers, and because organisms use so much energy to maintain themselves and reproduce, the amount of energy retained in living organisms decreases as you move up through each trophic level. So trophic levels can be represented with a pyramid to show the decrease in energy. Less energy is available for consumers at each level of the energy pyramid. Specifically, as you recall, only about 10% of the total energy at one trophic level is passed on to the next higher trophic level. Let's use some numbers to illustrate our point. If 1,000 kilocalories of energy are present at the primary producer level, 1/10 of this energy, only about 100 kilocalories, is passed on to the primary consumers in the next level. Even less energy is available for the secondary consumers, 10 kilocalories of energy, and only 1 kilocalorie for the tertiary consumer, and so forth and so on. Food chains usually have 5 or less trophic levels because there is not enough energy to support the next level. It simply runs out. Energy pyramids can also tell you something about how big organism populations are. As you go up the pyramid, population sizes decrease. You must have a very large population of producers to support a smaller population of primary consumers. Likewise, the population of primary consumers must be significantly bigger than the population of secondary consumers. There must be more prey than predators if the predators are to survive. This is why every ecosystem is founded on large producer populations. Their abundance determines how many other organisms the ecosystem can support. This is called a carrying capacity. Apex predators always have the smallest population because they have the least amount of energy available to them in the ecosystem. Symbiotic relationships are just relationships between two living organisms, and they represent some of the coolest things that happen in nature. Just like any other relationship, symbiotic relationships can be really good, or meh, or actually harmful to the organisms that have the relationships. The first one, commensalism, I would call a meh relationship. Not really a relationship that is bad, but not really good either. In a commensalist relationship, one organism benefits from the relationship, and the other organism doesn't benefit, but isn't harmed either. A good example would just be a bird living in a tree. The bird benefits because it has a safe place to raise its young, to sleep at night, and the tree isn't harmed. It remains wholly unaffected by the bird's presence. Mutualism is the kind of relationship you want to shoot for if you're ever going to be in a relationship. It's a relationship where both organisms, both partners in the relationship, benefit. A good example is the oxpecker and the rhino. The oxpecker are these little birds on the rhino's back. The oxpecker gets protection from this giant animal. It gets a free ride, and it also gets a free meal. What these little guys are doing is picking parasites out of the rhino's back. The rhino benefits from having parasites removed from its back. The last type we've already talked about, last type of symbiotic relationship, it's parasitism. This is a relationship you wish to avoid. It's where one organism benefits at the other organism's expense. Not all parasites are like the ones we've seen in class. Not everything is a botfly or some blood-sucking nasty creature. Instead, let's take a look at the cowbird. The cowbird is an organism that lays its egg in another bird's nest. So it's a symbiotic relationship between two birds. The unsuspecting bird raises the cowbird offspring as its own. It invests its time and its energy in raising up the cowbird's young. The cowbird benefits, and the poor bird who's raising this offspring is harmed. And often the offspring of the bird is harmed as well. The cowbird's offspring tends to push the other chicks out of the nest. So don't think that parasitism always involves eating or blood-sucking. Sometimes parasitism takes on an unusual form. Just remember, any relationship between two organisms where one is harmed and the other benefits is parasitism.